won't have that little incident again. And I am just going to share Google Chrome. Okay, so let's see. Basically, what's going on right now is that I have decided to bag this lecture. What I'm going to do today is talk about the project, Jupyter Notebooks, Plot9, and answer any questions. I had a lecture prepared on Python at higher levels, things that we haven't done. The lecture was not going to be on the final. It's mostly an overview of Flask and Django and using Python to run your own website, which is fairly common. We actually offer another course, CompSci 291, which is a higher level second semester Python course where you will run your own website in Python. Apologies for just a second. Make sure I don't get beeped by Microsoft Teams going off on another computer. Any rate, so if you're really interested, the material's out there. Let me know after class and I'll point you toward it. But rather than inundate you with more information that won't be on the final when you're already swamped with homework 6, project 3, and the final next Monday, in addition to whatever other classes you're going to take, I decided I would just bag that lecture and spend some more time talking about the stuff we've already had that will be on the final that you are responsible for the project. An announcement I put out last night, a sample final on Blackboard. It is in the assignments section where you see homework 6 and project 3 and everything else. It's called Spring 2021 Sample Final Exam. We are going to go through this on Wednesday, so I won't spend a lot of time today. It's like the other exams that you've seen. It's a little longer because it's worth more points. But other than that, you shouldn't be surprised by anything you see. As I said, we'll go over it in class on Wednesday. Wednesday is officially the last day of class of the semester. So we need to wrap everything else then. The final is cumulative. What you see as our semester's sample final is actually last semester's actual final. It was the final I gave last semester with 2 exceptions. I threw 2 questions out and replaced them. So when we go over the sample final on Wednesday, you'll see that, like I said, it was last semester's final. With that being said, that's what's going to happen Wednesday. And of course, the final is next Monday. What I want to do is work through some of the assignments you have in Project 3 and cover some way to work them. I was going to do a live demo of this on last Wednesday, as you know, in the last 10 minutes of class. And of course, like any live demo, it failed miserably. We're going to do it again. This time I've practiced it. I talked about putting a video up, but I never got around to that. So this recording, which will go up on the YouTube channel, will suffice as the video. To show you, I have already done this, so it works, but I'm going to start a new Jupyter Notebook and work through this, and I'm just going to refer back to my existing solution if I get in trouble. So we're going to walk through this, how to do Project 3, some hints on Pandas, Plot9, things you want to see, and feel free to ask questions. So I'm not going to do it in PyCharm. I'm going to do it the more generic way. It works the same in PyCharm. If you've got, again, if you've got the professional edition, you could do it there. I just wanted to do it the more generic way. So I've got Jupyter running on my Mac. This is started. I just basically popped up a terminal window and typed Jupyter Notebook. And after I typed Jupyter Notebook in a terminal window on my Mac, same thing on PowerShell for Windows. This is the screen I see. So I want to create a new Jupyter Notebook. These are the ones that already knows about on my Mac. I'm going to start a new Python 3 notebook. And this is what it looks like. It comes up as a new code cell, Python cell on my screen. So just to verify that it works, I'm going to type our standard greeting. And I'm going to run that cell. And it works right. It creates a new cell for me. I'm going to do a markdown cell. Remember, you are supposed to include markdown cells explaining what you're doing and, put in some fancy graphics, fancy typing and things like that. This will be a markdown cell. Now that we know this notebook is working, let's solve the problem for project 3. First, read in the data and create the 2D list. The interesting thing is when you run a markdown cell, this is what it looks like. It gives you the nice, pretty printing comments of everything you're doing. Okay, I need to refer back to one thing. Here we go. In my Mac, I stored all of the data files I downloaded in a particular directory. Now, I talked about this on Wednesday, but to reiterate, you've got the 14 data files. You can download them from GitHub. You can download them from Blackboard. They're the same files. It doesn't matter. Just download and get them. What I did is I declared a Python constant that is the location in which I have the files. So this data directory has a Macintosh path name. That is the place where I've got all of my data files, and so I'm just going to use that as a constant so that I don't have to keep typing this string. The reason is, as you've seen in the past, when I have to continually type a long string, I make typographical errors, and then we have to stop for a second while my project fails because of that error. So I'm going to declare that. Now, to read things in, I need the OS or operating system module from Python, and I just import that by typing import OS, and that gives me the operating system capabilities that I need. Test as you go. I just want to run this cell to make sure I haven't done anything right, and it works, so I've correctly started this. Now, here's what I'm going to do. Each data file, as you'll recall, has a, and I'm just going to copy this code over from the section where I got it done. I talked about it last time. What I do, and I'll explain one thing, is, let me explain this code. Let me copy this code over and then I'll explain it. So what I do is to read in a file, I have all of these CSV files. I have a variable that holds the file name. I open the file, read it in. The first line is a header line. It's the column names. I don't need it. So this line, infile.readLine, simply reads and throws away the header line in each data file. That's all it does. I don't need it for anything else. After that, I use a read to read in everything in the file in a single step. I could do read line, I could do read lines, I could do whatever. I've chosen to do read. Yeah, it's the same thing I did last Wednesday. This reads in everything after that first header line. So this gives me all the data I want. Now, as you recall, when you read in a CSV file, you have data on each line separated by commas, and each line is separated by a new line character. Well, that means the first thing I can do is I can split this string. When this highlighted line is executed, D is a single string containing all the file contents. I can split it on new lines. If I split it on new lines, I now have a one-dimensional list, and I called it D_list to be the one-dimensional list that has each line of data. Now, what I need to do is split each line of the file. I have, again, a list that's each line of data. I have to split each line of the file by the commas. I have to split it. I have to get rid of those commas and split the data into its useful functions. Now, in addition, I kind of talked about previously, and I want to go over, I need to add the date. In those data files, there is no date that says this is April 11th, April 12th, April 13th, April 14th, and so on. That is encoded in the name of the file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to append to every line of data an integer that represents the date. So when I read in the file from April 11th, I'm going to add an 11 at the end of every row, at the end of every item. I'm going to add an 11 to indicate this came from April 11th. When I read in the April 12th file, I'm going to append April 12th to it. When I read in the April 13th file, I'm going to add the 13, I'm going to add the 14, I'm going to add the 15. Okay, last Wednesday when I went through this, I talked about this, but I didn't show you how to do it. That's why this code is a little bit different from last Wednesday. So if you looked at the code, I think I presented both last Monday and last Wednesday. This is a little bit different because what I'm actually doing here is I'm actually appending the date, just the number, they're all April, so it's just 11, 12, 13, 14, so on, to each row. So what I'm doing is I created a line, each record, each state, as it turns out, is a separate line, is a separate entry in my list. I'm going to split it on the commas. Okay, not a problem. We know we have a CSV file, everything's separated by commas. We just split it by comma. And then I append the date. So I use this variable called J to store the date. And I've synchronized it. I start with J as 10, and then when I open the file, I increment J by 1. So for the first file, J's 11. For the second file, J's 12. For the third file, J's 13. For the fourth file, J's 14, and so on. So all this is doing is it's inserting the date of the date of the month into each row of each file, making sure it's correct. Now, hint, to do this right, I have to make sure I have all the I have all the files in order in the directory, but that turns out not to be a problem. I actually have that done fairly easily, that we can do that outside of Python. So what this does is, for a file, it opens it, it throws away the header line. There's no, there's no column headings there. I don't need them. I read the rest. Then I split on the new line to get the rows. Then I split each line on the comma to get the individual values. And then I append the date to the end of each line. And now what I do is I'm keeping what I call a master list for now. And the master list just gets this line from this file. I have a print statement to verify that this works correctly. I do that for each file to make sure I get all the files in my directory. What I do is I run a for loop that goes through every file in my directory. Now, I mentioned last time, if you're sure your directory is pure, if you're sure your directory contains nothing but the CSV files, you're fine. But sometimes directories have junk. Sometimes directories have things you don't really need. And so what I do is I just put an if statement that says, let's make sure this is really a CSV file and I'm not reading in some junk I didn't realize was in the directory. That's just, safe programming. So now, if I have copied this over correctly, when I run this cell, and what did it tell me? It says Okay. Let's see. Why did this not work when it ran in the other case? Okay. Here we go. Data directory is this. Let's do this all. Okay. It ran in the case here. Yep. It ran there. So now, in theory, I should be able to just copy all of this over to my new cell. Delete that, insert the thing. This is the thing I just copied over. Like I said, live demos always fail. Let's see what I did now. Interesting. It's going to do this to me. Okay. .csv is in file, and open file R is in file. No such file or directory, 42021 CSV. Okay. Let's go check. Bear with me just a second. I know I'm not sharing Finder, but you should be able to see this. We'll take care of it. And the directory was document spring 21 project 3. And 20th is there. Okay, we'll go back to the version that I already did, and I'll just explain it rather than typing it out. This is just an example of what you get. It's a long 2D list. And if you look at each element, for example, Alabama, US, 2021-14, 04-21, etc., and you can see that I've appended the date. Let me find this. The date is appended to each one of these. Oh, what's quite possible if these files are open. The reason this isn't working in the new one is I still have the old one open, and so the files are not closed, and so they can't be read in again. Okay. So I have these, any rate, when it all works, and then you see the 24 is appended as the day, is the date, and all of these work out. Okay. Now, let me go to GitHub and get the actual assignment. And I'm typing on the wrong keyboard. That kind of a Monday. Now, as I've mentioned, I have 3 different computers in here with 3 different mice and 3 different keyboards. And remembering to type on the right keyboard and click with the right mouse is sometimes an interesting situation. Here is the Project 3 description. Okay, so we've added in, we've got Jupyter running. Now, we did this empty 2D list. I called it master list. And this is the section I've done. So now I'm on to step 9 in the assignment. So project 3, step 9 says create a simpler list. We don't care about all the data in the field, like the latitude and longitude of each state. Those aren't going to change. I don't know what I care about for coronavirus. So what I want to do is I want to narrow this down. I want to only pick columns 0, 5, 6, 10, 11, 13, and 18, where 18 is the new column that we created by appending the date to every line. Okay, so how am I going to do step 9? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my master list, my master 2D list, and I'm going to row by row select only these columns. So here's an example of how you can do it. I define a constant, which is a list of the columns that we want. The columns that we want are 0, 5, 6, 10, 11, 13, and 18. Go over to the assignment, 0, 5, 6, 10, 11, 13, and 18. These are the columns we want. So what I'm going to do is I define a new empty 2D list. I call it database. Database is my new empty 2D list. Then I create this constant list, which is the columns we want. Now, I'm going to go through row by row by row. Remember, with the 2D list, you can work with a row as a whole. I'm going to take a row, master list sub I. Okay, I'm going to take master list sub I, and from there, I'm only going to select the columns I want. The way I do that is I create a new 1D list called temp list. Temp list is a new 1D list, and I'm going to go through. Now, this is not the most efficient coding, but what I want to do is explain something here. In a row, I'm going to go through each of the columns. There happen to be 19 columns at the most in every row. So to play it safe, I'm going to pick 0 through 20, 19 of them. If J is the index, J is just the index integer that's going through. If J is in this list of columns we want, if J is 0, J is 5, J is 6, J is 10, what have you, if that's the case, then I'm just going to append to my 1D temp list that individual value. So in other words, if in this row, if in row 0, I'm in column 0, I'm going to append master list sub 0, 0, which is Alabama. If J is 5, it's in there. For J being 1, 2, 3, and 4, I don't care. I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to do nothing if J is 1, 2, 3, 4. That's how I get rid of those old columns that I don't care about. If J is 1, 2, 3, 4, I do nothing. When J is 5, I get 0, 5. When J is 6, I get 0, 6. 7, 8, and 9, do nothing, etc. I'm just keying on elements in this list. So this is what I'm doing. I'm selecting these lists, these elements, and I'm putting them in temp list. And then when I'm done, I'm appending that entire row to my, I now call it database. Database is my big list of what I want slimmed down. So what I do is I take my original, this mess right here, I go through it row by row, and in that row, I only select the columns we want, which are defined here. And when I'm done, I have the variable database that is a 2D list containing only those columns that I care about. And it looks like this. So after this cell is run, scroll up a little bit. After this cell is run, I now have only those items that I want. Now, let me insert a cell above this. Let me make it a markdown cell. And I'm going to say the following cell selects only the columns that we want from the above 2D list. The result will be the 2D list of data that we care about and that we can now analyze. Okay? And again, it's a markdown cell. When you run a markdown cell, it just does this, and that's how you put your comments here. This is, a somewhat nicer way than just hashtags or triple double quotes or whatever. You're using the markdown capabilities of Jupyter to explain to me, since I'm grading your programs starting Thursday, what you're doing. So we just insert markdown cells here and there. I sort of go through that a little bit in the assignment where I say, put a new markdown cell and explain what you're doing. That's what this is. Okay. So anyway, when we're done with this cell, we now have the 2D list that we want. So now I'm going to insert another markdown cell. And I'm going to tell you what I'm doing here. Now I need to convert this 2D list to a pandas data frame. Why? Because our graphics package, Plot9, works on data frames. It doesn't easily work on 2D lists. So when you're using the tool, sometimes you have to accommodate the way the tool works. So that's what we're going to do next. Okay. Now above, I imported pandas. Again, if pandas is installed, you just on your computer where you can get it, it's just an import pandas, which is all this is. And often I have a simple one. I'll insert, believe it or not, it doesn't hurt to do this again. So I will insert another cell and I will import pandas as PD. Okay. And I run this, and now pandas is available. Now that I have it imported, I will say df. Df is a data frame. That's what I'm going to use that term for. Equals pandas. I imported it as PDs. I could type out pandas if I wanted to, but I'm just going to say PD because I imported it as PD. Dot data frame, and my 2D list is database. So what this command right here says is take the 2D list you call database. Database was created in the previous cell. Okay. Previous cell created database. Now take it and using pandas convert it to a data frame. Now, warning, this is case sensitive. I've already talked to a number of students who've had problems with it. It turns out that data frame here is case sensitive. If you spell it all lowercase, it's not going to work. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. Yeah, I will go over how to explain the. I will go over submission. At the end of class. Okay. Now, remember I threw away the column headers, so Pandas is not sure for this data frame what the column headers could be. It can figure it out using defaults. But what this line does is it says explicitly, hey, these are the column headings in order. The first column you're going to see is called state. The second is called confirmed. The third is called deaths, and so on. I think in the instructions I gave you slightly different versions as to what the column. Yeah, here it is. This is what you should use. I gave you in the assignment statement the thing to use. This is slightly different. Sorry about that. I didn't have it handy when I was writing it, but that's what this statement does. This tells Jupyter, tells Pandas, these are the column names. If you print it out, this is what it looks like. There are 825 rows, and you can see you now only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns. 825 rows of data, 7 columns. Okay. Now, you can see some of these rows are junk. Like this last row was one of these things that had a lot of commas. That's an extra row that we had trouble reading in with some of the things. Pandas is a very nice command called drop NA. Drop NA says get rid of anything that isn't a correct, valid, full, flushed out value. It's not applicable. NA stands for non-applicable. Drop NA says take anything that isn't a real row and throw it away. And then Pandas very nicely shows you this. And you see that we only got rid of one row. It's now, or we got rid of 13 rows that were not correct or valid. Okay, so drop NA just says throw away any less than complete row, and that will not mess up my graphics. Okay, so that's drop NA. Now, if you go to the assignment, you have done step 10. Now you have to start using plot9 in your analysis. And we'll talk about step 11. Step 11. Now I'm gonna show you something that might make it easier. So I'm gonna re-import plot9. No harm, no foul. It'll do it. You can import code multiple times. What I'm gonna use is an import statement, and I'm going to import the specific modules I want. Okay. What I want you to do is take all the states that begin with A on the 11th of April. So date is going to be 11, and it's the states that are Arizona, Alaska, Alabama, and Arkansas. Now you can get fancy if you want and say go to state, and if the first letter of state is a capital A, blah 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 blah. You could do all of that. Here is a simple, straightforward way to do that. What I do is, again, I create a list. And this cell right here, I'm going to insert a cell above it. I'm going to make it a markdown cell. And I'm going to type. The next cell will select only those states that begin with A and only those records from the 11th. Run that. And that, again, gives me text, lets me, as I'm grading it, make sure that I see what you do. Here's how I do it. I create a list that I call the A states. The A states, it's a constant, it's a list of Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, and Arkansas. Those are the states that begin with A. Again, I could say go into the string and look to see if the first character, if the string of 0 is a capital A, but it's easier for me to do it with this list. Look for Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, and Arizona. Now we're talking syntax. This is not standard Python syntax. This is Pandas syntax. If you go to I gave you the link to where the documentation is. If you go through, you'll find that the syntax look like this. I'm going to create a new data frame. I call A underscore data frame. It's the data frame with states begin with A that I care about. From DF, select everything where the date is 11.0. Now, if you look above, you can see that Pandas very nicely converted my integers to floats. I hate them for doing that. You can convert it back to integers if you want, but we'll just work with the float. It's easier at this point. So select from DF, date equals 11.0, and the state is in this list. The syntax for saying the state is in this list is df substate dot is in parentheses this list. So this here is just Pandas syntax for saying that the state is in this list. The state is Alabama or Alaska or Arkansas or Arizona. And the ampersand here is an and sign. The date is the 11th. So this statement right here gives me only the records where the state begins with an A and the date is the 11th. And when I run this, this is what I get. 4 records, 4 rows, each of which have 7 columns. Okay. If you want to print it out in pandas notation, let me insert cell below. If you do it this way, this prints it out in pandas notation in a nice table. I don't care. It is acceptable to use a print statement like this. This print statement is a standard Python print statement, and it produces this. If you want to use the pandas print capability, you just give this the variable name, and it prints it out in this nice table. Either one's okay. Neither is going to get you more or less points. Okay. Now it is time to plot, to print what 11 says. A ggplot object, draw a bar chart with the state on the x-axis and the y-axis being the number of confirmed cases of COVID. Your statement should involve something like, and I gave you a hint, use geom call, AES. So here is what it turns out to look like. I talked about a minute ago importing again. What I want to do is I'm going to say from plot9 explicitly. I want to import ggplot. I want to import AES, and I want to import geom underscore call. By the way, there's a typo in the assignment. It is not geom hyphen call. This hyphen right here is a typo. It's an underscore. So if you type geom hyphen call and you get unrecognized, don't know what it is, that's because, sorry about that, that was a typo in the assignment. It's an underscore. So I talked a little bit about this last week. Here is how we would do this. Now, I imported the modules I need. Now, I'm going to store this in G because I want to store it somewhere. Create a ggplot object. From what data frame? From what data set am I going to use to create ggplot? When I walked through this last week, I used just the cars data sets and the flower data sets and whatever that come with the package. Now we're using our own data set. I want to use A underscore DF. Remember from above, A underscore DF is this thing. That's the data set that's only the 11th, and that is only the A states. Okay, that's why I'm using ADF. So I have to tell ggplot I want to create an object from this data set, and it will do that. Now, again, if you try to give it a 2D list instead of a data set, it's a pain to make it work. We're not going to go there. Don't do that. Okay. Question for John. This is getting recorded, right? Yes. Let me double check to make sure recording is turned. It looks like recording is turned on. Hang on a second. Double checking on. Yes, it looks like it is recording right now. Thank you for asking. It's always good. That's embarrassing if I somehow mess it up and we don't get it recorded. Yes, this is being recorded and will be posted to YouTube tonight. Now, so from the data set A underscore DF, aesthetic. I want the x-axis to be state. I want the y-axis to be confirmed. And I want to use geom underscore call. Now, I'm going to take this out for now and run it, and you'll see the difference. And here is my bar chart. Here is how many cases were in Alabama. Here is how many cases were in Alaska. Here is how many cases were in Arizona. Here is how many cases were in Arkansas on the particular date. Now, this is boring. It's grayscale, you know, black and white, grayscale. It's nothing fancy. You can make it a little prettier. What I did here before, and which I will do again to show you the difference, is you can tell what color to use to do the bar charts in the simplest case, I'm just going to say make it green. Okay, by saying fill equals, in this case, green, it creates it again, and it draws green bars instead of gray ones. It's a little prettier. It's a little more vibrant. It's a little more what have you in this case. Okay. If we had data that was further broken down into groups, then we could draw multi-colored bars. Each bar could be different color based on what makes up the particular group. If we had Alabama broken down into men versus women, white versus black versus Hispanic versus Asian, if we had that kind of data, we could make these bars different colors to indicate that I did not give you that data. You do not have to go that far in this project. You just do something like this. This is essentially what I'm looking for in step 11, something like that. Now, it's interesting. I tell you that I want a bar chart. I say right here in the assignment, draw a bar chart, but then I tell you to use geom_call. Well, there's specifically a bar chart. Why don't we just use that? Why don't we tell, and I added a markdown cell that says, what happens if you make this geom bar? Yeah, trying to draw a bar chart, use geom_bar. Here is what will happen. So I'm going to import ggplot, AES, and geom_bar, and then I'm going to give it the syntax to say ggplot from A_GF by data frame with A's on the 11th. And the aesthetic, I want the x-axis to be state, the y-axis to be confirmed, and I want it to be a bar chart, geom_bar. And I run it. And gee, I get an error message. I get a lot of data. Pandas data, Plot9 data is very verbose. It takes a while to work through it. Here's what happens. If you use a bar chart this way, geom_bar, you cannot give it a y equals and use some other variable. I can't use y equals confirmed cases from the data sets. The only thing a bar chart will do is it will count the entries in your table. So this is great if I have one entry for every different person. A bar chart geom_bar would count things up for me and do a count. It cannot do an XY. So you don't do this. You don't have to show me the error. But for those who are curious as to why I told you to use a geom_call for a bar chart instead of geom_bar, don't use a bar geometry, use a column geometry. The bar geometry does not permit doing something like this, where we're showing the different numbers of confirmed cases. It can only do counts. So that's why we don't use geom_bar to draw a bar chart. Okay. So use the geom_call. Again, ignore this typo. Sorry about that. It's not hyphen, it's an underscore. Now let's look at step 12. Trend lines. I want you to create a multi-line graph showing deaths over the entire 14-day period, all of them, for the following states: Maryland, New York, Michigan, and California. What we want to do is show how the cases went up and or down over the dates and see if the states had similar patterns or whether some dates were different than others. You want to look at these states and see, well, this state is handling it really well. This state's screwing up. Some governor needs to be figuratively slapped, not physically. That would be bad. Figuratively, you're doing bad, you're doing better, you're doing worse, whatever. So how are we going to do step 12? Let's go back to this thing we've already done. Okay. This time, again, I need to create a list of states. In step 11, I cared about the 4 states that begin with A: Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas. Step 12, I explicitly told you what 4 states I cared about. I cared about Maryland, New York, Michigan, and California. So I'm going to define a constant. This constant is this list of these 4 states: Maryland, New York, Michigan, California. And now I'm going to create a new data frame. I'm going to pick out from my 2D list only those states where the entry is in this list. So same syntax as before. From the original data set, DF. DF is our original data set of everything. only pick those that have an entry of state, that have a value of state that is in this list. So that's what this does. This says from the original data set, only select those things where the value of state is in this list: Maryland, New York, Michigan, California. And then store that in something I called CDF because I have no imagination whatsoever. This is not a real good variable name, but it makes the point. It's a data frame. I called it C because, I don't know, it was an A. And I had used B in something else that failed. So C, whatever. Good variable name here. Pick it. To see what it is, to check myself. Verify, test, verify, test, verify, test, verify. Make sure it works. What does CDF look like? It looks like this. Here are the entries. California, New York, Maryland, Michigan. Here are the numbers. Here is the date. Okay. This tells me what I've got. This, just checking what I've done, produces this data set. And now from this data set, I can draw my multi-line chart. How do I print a multi-line chart? I need geom line. I need also, to make it clearer, geom point. Okay, if I don't use geom point, I don't get the points plotted. I just get the line. I add this to make it more clear. Now, what am I going to do? I could also re-import ggplot. I can re-import aesthetic. I can re-import everything else. I don't need to. I'm just importing these. What am I doing? Creating a new ggplot object from this new data set, C_df. C_df plus, now what's my aesthetic? My aesthetic is my x-axis is going to be the date. My y-axis is going to be confirmed. How do I get these multiple different lines? What I'm going to do is group. I want to group all the entries in this data set by state. Group equals state says take all of the entries for New York and put them together. Take all the entries for Maryland and put them together. Take all the entries for California and put them together. Take all the entries for Michigan and put them together. That's what group equals state does. Now, I could have them all be gray lines. I don't want to have all be gray lines because that's ugliness. That doesn't produce things that I want to see. Okay, so I'm going to also take the opportunity in my aesthetic to tell Plot9 that I want you to draw a different color line by each state. Now, I could assign a specific color to each state. I could assign California gold. I could assign Maryland red. I could assign Michigan blue. And I could assign New York, I don't know, pick a color black. Okay. I could do that, but I'm going to pick whatever Plot9 assigns. I'm going to say, Plot9, assign a different color by state. You pick, I don't care. The people who wrote Plot9 did a lot of studying on what the best colors are for contrast and pleasing to the eye, what have you. So here again, here is our aesthetic for this graphic. Our aesthetic is the x-axis is going to be date. The y-axis is the number of confirmed cases. The color, I want everything grouped by state, and I want color by state. Now, I want to draw a line. So it's a line geometry, geom_line. And to make it clearer what's happening, I want the individual data points plotted on the line. If I didn't have this, I wouldn't get the data points plotted on the line. I just get these lines, and it would be a little bit harder to understand what's going on. So by plotting the data points and drawing the line, this is what I get. And as you can see, Plot9 assigns red for California, green for Maryland, this kind of an aqua, teal, whatever you want to call that, blue for Michigan, and purple for New York. And you can see the number of cases on any particular day. This is really damn hard to read. but you can see where these are, and you can see that actually, you know, if you look at it, it goes down. More cases is toward the bottom. If I play with this, I can spread this out and make these numbers of confirmed cases more readable. But what you would see from this is New York has more cases in their trend than California is next, then Maryland, then Michigan. And you can plot how these things fit. But you can see, more interesting to me, is that all of these more or less follow the same general trends. Everybody got worse at the same time. Everybody got better at the same time. Everybody had a dip. Everybody had a growth. So the interesting thing from this graphics, from doing this analysis, is you can spot the trends that happen over time. And you can see that regardless of what the state is doing, we could yell at Governor Cuomo, or we could yell at Governor Hogan, or Governor Whitmer, or Governor Newsom, but we can see that the trends happen to be following basically similar patterns over time. And that's the advantage of this tool. Okay. And so that would be something like this would be what you want to do from step 12. And then you're going to just add a markdown cell describing for me what kind of trends you see. Now, step 13, I want 2 more graphs. You figure out what you want to do. You know that where the documentation for plot 9 is. You know, go read them and come up with 2 plots. Now, I will tell you that when I grade these, you know, step 13 is probably going to be the last 5 points. So if you really get stuck, you get 11 working, you get 12 working, you produce graphics, you get interesting results, you write them up, you document them, everything's done, and you just don't know how to get creative in step 13, that's only 5 points out of the 100. Don't sweat it. But I'd really like to see you start to apply your Python skills and come up with some interesting more graphics. It's always fun. It's always fun to see what the students come up with. So that's what I'm trying to get with in step 13 is you go off on your own and you read the documentation and you learn how all this works and you go ahead and show off your Python skills. That's what I'm looking for. But if you can't, if you really, you know, are having trouble, then, you know, it's only 5 points. You'll get a 95. It's not a big deal. So that's where we are. That is a hint on Project 3. That's an explanation and an illustration. Now, you are permitted, as always, to use any code I gave you. Don't use exactly all the code I gave you because there's a couple of things. Like for example, I'm sure you put your directory in a different place than I did it. If you're using Windows rather than a Mac, you've got to figure that out. So that constant will be a little different. The same idea will be there. That's okay. The same sorting. That's okay. The same whatever. Make sure, now that here's a warning, make sure I presumed when I read in my files right here, hang on a second, get out of the way. When I did this reading and assigned 11, 12, 13, 14 as we go, I presumed I was reading in the files in exactly the right order. I was reading in April 11th first, and that got 11. I was reading in April 12th second, and that got a different. That got a specific order. I was reading in April 13th third. I was reading in April 14th fourth. If you don't read in the files in exactly the right order and you append the date this way, you'll get different results. So either make sure you're reading in the files in exactly the right order or look at the file name and see which date this is before you apply it. Now, how do you do that? This variable right here, file, will contain the file name. That's where you will find 04-20-2021.csv, right? What you do is you look through that string for 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. You write a statement that says what's the name of the file, what date is in the file, and then you assign the appropriate date that way, and it'll work. That'll be the generic answer. This was a simpler version where I sort of rigged my directory to make sure I read in the files in the right order. Okay, that's one thing you need to look at. Okay, that's not bad. That's not a hard thing to do. And like I said, if you can guarantee you're reading in the files in the right order, you don't need to do that. Other things I did, this is all fine. You know, put comments in here, explain to me what you're doing. I did the voice track when I grade your programs. I don't have the voice track. Please use the names I gave in the assignment rather than these. These are essentially the same things, but there's a minor difference that's easy to fix. You can use this graphics, play around with this a little bit, see what you can do to make it a little fancier. Don't put in the one that gives the error. You do not need to show me the error. That's okay. Sorry, I got a squealing dog behind me. And then the lines, play around with this and see if you can make it a little bit better. And then, like I said, for 5 extra points down at the bottom, get creative and show me 2 extra graphics. That's project 3. Homework 6. Okay. How to submit homework 6. How to submit homework 6. How to submit project 3. Submitting project 3. Stop. Let me bring up. I'll do it on a slide. Our directory will be ordered by date. Yes. If you want to play it safe, I will order the files by date. Give me just a second. Okay, I unmuted. Apologies. We had some crazy dogs, so I muted for just a second there. Submitting project 3. I believe it should be submit. It's a lowercase. Thank you for helping me, Google Slides. CMSC 201. I believe it's project 3, all caps. And your file should end in .ipynb, IPYNB. It should not be a .py. You do not have to submit results. You do not have to submit a .py. You should be submitting project3.ipynb. Now, as I mentioned, to clarify, I'll go back and double check this. I believe it's all caps. I've talked to Sean. Sean's the head TA who's responsible for the submission system. This is what it should be. If not, I'll get a message out. But you should definitely, absolutely submit an IPynB. That is what Jupyter Notebook, that's the extension Jupyter Notebook attaches by default to everything, because Jupyter used to be called IPython Notebooks. So IPython Notebooks is IPynB. That's what you should do. Okay, and then what happens is they're due Wednesday, Thursday. I'm going to go on to gl.umbc.edu. I'm going to download them to a clean, empty laptop I keep for this purpose. I'm going to grade them, and then I'm going to wipe that laptop, and I'll post your grades on Grading Central on Blackboard. I hope to have everything graded before the final, so that when we assign your final grades, that'll be it for the semester, we hope. Yeah, according to what I've seen, unless I'm misreading, Wednesday is officially the last day of class. So, I mean, obviously, whether you show up or not, I don't grade on attendance. My only plan for Wednesday's class is to go through that sample final and answer any other questions you have. So I don't know that it'll take the whole time. But yeah, last Wednesday was the last new material you're responsible for. As I said, today's lecture was going to be on advanced topics in Python using Flask and Django to run Python-based web servers, but that wasn't going to be in the final anyway. And I felt it was more important to go through the project, so we did that instead. Any questions before we're done today? Yeah. Due Wednesday at midnight. That is correct. Wednesday the 12th at midnight is the due date for Project 3. Okay. Any other questions? I am going to stop recording. And of course, after WebEx finishes with this,
Can I ask a quick question for a professor? I know homework
Certainly.
is due tonight. Yeah.
Yep.
One quick. And is it okay if I share my screen?
Yep. Hang on just a